World Cup Pool A preview. As you guys can probably see, I have changed location just slightly. Hopefully this is where I'm going to be watching all the Rugby World Cup games. I'm in my lounge instead of in my bedroom. The games are all on at night, so to avoid sleeping baby, I'm going to try to do the videos in here. We'll see how that goes. New whiteboard. Hung some stuff in the background, so yeah, should be a bit of fun. It makes me realize I have a lot of club flags, but not many national team flags. So I've got Munster flying in the background because this is Pool A, which contains Ireland, Scotland, Japan, Russia, and Samoa. Is there a bin? First time in the new location, and there's a bin coming down the driveway. If you've been with the channel for a while, you know about the bins. Yeah, this is the pool that's going to kick things off. The opening game is between Russia and Japan. I've put the fixtures just briefly there on the board. I'll go over the color coding in a second. I also should mention before I forget that a lot of this information comes from Russ Petty on Twitter. He's done some really excellent analysis on the pools and the travel and all the rest days and all that kind of stuff, and how it's going to advantage or disadvantage certain teams. But we're looking at Ireland, Scotland, Japan, Russia, and Samoa. How are they going to go? The favorite for this pool is kind of unsurprisingly Ireland. They're the ones picked to go through top of the pool, with Scotland favored to also get out. Japan are the third favorite, and then Samoa slightly above Russia at the back end. So I think it's mostly about these top three teams that are predicted to go through, with a few people saying don't write off the Samoans. And if you've had a look at the squad, there's certainly a fair few talented guys there. We get kicking off with Japan against Russia in Tokyo. That's the first game. I've got both those games in green for Japan, Russia, and then Russia against Japan, because essentially those teams go into that game rested. It's the first game of the year, or for the World Cup anyway, and yeah, they haven't had any games in the run-up, so they should be at 100% fitness without any fatigue, depending on how hard they've been training, obviously. But I mean, Japan pretty favoured to do quite well in that game, and get the World Cup off to a flying start for the Japanese. The next game is a big one. It's Ireland against Scotland. That's the second game. Again, I got it in green for both these teams because they go into it rested. Essentially, and they said it in the French press conference, is that whoever wins that game has already got one foot in the quarterfinals. Whoever loses that game, the pressure is really on them for when they come up against Japan, and also against Samoa and Russia as well. But the loser of that game is going to face a showdown with Japan and Japan, so it's going to be a very tough fixture. Russia then have to play Samoa in the third game of the round, so it's Samoa's first game. They're against the Russians in green, but for the Russians, they are in red. I've put red there when they've only got 3 or 4 days rest. So yeah, the Russians kind of have to back up from their first game against Japan pretty quickly for their game against Samoa, which is going to make life tough for them. Then it's a big game. It's Japan against Ireland. Japan go into that with a full 7 days rest. So you can see them. They've got Ireland in green because they've had a full week, which is generally the cycle that rugby teams go through. Between games, it's generally a week. Sometimes it is 6 days, but I'm calling a week kind of optimal conditions. Whereas Ireland, coming off that game against Scotland, have only got 5 days off. So for them, it's having to back up twice in a row against two of the top teams in the pool. So it's not going to be an easy one for Joe Schmidt and the guys to manage. I mean, it could be worse. It could be a shorter turnaround, but it's certainly not ideal. But they do get those two tough games out of the way. If they can get a couple of wins, then they should be sitting pretty going into the knockout stages. But again, that kind of remains to be seen. Then you've got Scotland against Samoa. Again, Scotland going to that one fully rested. Samoa having to back up from their previous game. They're on 5 days rest, which is, again, it's not ideal, but it's World Cup, so you have to back up relatively quickly. Ireland have got a game against Russia following that. Russia are on 8 days rest. Ireland have only got the 4 days, but you would imagine for that Russian game, with no disrespect to the Russians as they wear their jersey, Ireland will likely change out the majority of the team for that game. So, yeah, expect to see a lot of the guys who perhaps haven't featured heavily in the opening 2 games to feature in that game against Russia. Russia will be rearing to go with 8 days rest, but it's still going to be a very tough game. Then it's Japan against Samoa. This is Japan's only game where their rest period is less than 7 days. They're on 6 days rest, so it's still a pretty decent break. There's no 3 or 4 day turnaround for the Japanese at home. Samoa going into that one on a pretty rough turnaround. Samoa for that one only have 4 days rest, so they're going to have to back up pretty quickly. And if you're looking at the colours carefully on the board, you'll see that's kind of becoming a theme as well, that there are a couple of teams there who have Japan in red, meaning you're playing the hosts after playing another game pretty recently, whereas the Japanese don't have any red in their column. Following that one, Scotland against Russia. Again, you'd like to think that the Scots would get over that one. The Russians are on a kind of medium rest for that one. That is their final game. And for Scotland, they've had 8 days to recover, so they should be in a good condition. But then for the Scots, you've kind of got one eye more on the following game, because there's only a very short turnaround for them for that next game, which could be a do-or-die one against Japan. Ireland-Samoa is the second to last one of the pool. Ireland on 8 days rest, Samoa on 6. Again, Ireland may already be through to the quarterfinals by that stage if they need a win. You'd back them to get it, but again, it's World Cup. And lastly, Japan against Scotland. And you have to look at this and say it's some pretty careful planning, because Scotland go into this one, as I said, very quick turnaround after the Russian game, 3 days rest in what's in all likelihood going to be a very, very important do-or-die game, as I said, for Japan. A solid week off before that game. So, yeah, in terms of rest days, Japan do better than any other team at this World Cup with 20 rest days. Scotland have 18, which is the second best in that group. But it's just that rough turnaround at the end that's kind of seems deliberate. But again, Scotland will likely change up their team from Russia to Japan, so it may not affect so many of the players if they're not expected to play 2 weeks in a row. Ireland are third best with 17 days rest. Russia have 16 days rest, and Samoa get the fewest rest days of them all between games with just 15. And you can see the only game where they get a full week, well, is the opening game. Other than that, they always have to back up. There's no 7-day gap for them. They're the only ones without any green. In terms of travel, the Japanese actually have to do the least travel. I believe of all the teams at the Rugby World Cup, yes, of all the teams, they only have to travel 635 kilometres for all their games, whereas the others in the pool, Russia's at 965, Scotland's at 1,040, Ireland is at 1,099, and then Samoa is the toughest one of this pool, so they got the most travel and the least rest at 1,600 kilometres. But that being said, that is far from the most of all the pools. It's just the most in Pool A. So yeah, interestingly, Pool A, despite having some big guns in it and looking very competitive, is the least favoured pool to draw a World Cup winner. If you're putting money on at the bookies to guess which pool is going to win the World Cup, this one will give you the biggest return because it's the least favoured one to get a result. New Zealand against Ireland is the favoured final if one of these teams does make the final. So read into that what you will. Most of the pools, to be fair, if one of their teams is going to make the final, most of the predictions are New Zealand, at least bookies odds. But yeah, that's pretty much Pool A. As I said, Japan do pretty well in terms of the travel. You should go check out that tweet. I will link it in the description, which has got all the full details of the travel between each game. It's going to be tough for Russia in that pool with all those big guns, but good on them for making a World Cup. Samoa get the short end of the stick in terms of the travel and the rest, but hopefully those guys can do the country proud. Japan's got it all in their favour, being at home, having the most rest, having the least travel. So if there was a time they were going to get through to a knockout stage, this is probably it. and the pressure goes on Scotland and Ireland to perform up to those expectations. What do you guys think of Pool A? Who do you think is going to go through on top? Do you think the travel and the rest and whatnot is going to be a factor? You guys let me know your thoughts, and I'll talk to you again soon. See you later. So how are you going to watch all these Rugby World Cup games for Pool A? Well, if you live in the UK, that's all good. You can watch for free. There's a few other places as well doing it for free, but for most of us, it's behind a paywall. If that's the case for you, you can still go to the UK site where it's being shown, which is itv.com, which you can see I'm here, but you'll get this error message to say, sorry, this video isn't available right now. You make an account. You just do that with an email address. You can do that from anywhere in the world, but it's when you try to access the content that it gives you the error message. So when you get the error message, connect to ExpressVPN. Make sure your location is one which is in the UK. There are several options available, and once that's connected, you can just refresh your browser, and this time, instead of you getting an error message, it will just load the content. For me, I'm going to go to categories. I'm going to find some sport. The Rugby World Cup content for the most part isn't up yet because the tournament hasn't started, but there is still some preview content there. You can see there's Flats and Shanks in Japan, Rugby World Cup 2019. Click on that. Find an episode you want to load, and yeah, basically click it, and you're away. It's just as simple as that. The games are going to be live on the ITV Hub. They're going to be on demand on the ITV Hub. So if you're outside of the UK and looking for an easy, relatively inexpensive way to watch the rugby, this is the one to go for. There'll be a link in the description for ExpressVPN sign up. There's also a discount included in that. They give me a referral for you signing up that way, and they give you a discount. So hopefully it's all win-win.